Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Real Estate Realities with the Rebel Broker. My name's Robert Whitelaw, and I am the Rebel Broker, licensed real estate broker right here in California, member of the National Association of Realtors. But please do not hold that against me. I am a real estate broker right here in Southern Silicon Valley. If you'd like to get in contact with me, head on over to soldbyrobert.com. From there, you can find all the tools I provide to my clients, buyers, and sellers. If you're interested in buying, you can start your search there. If you are interested in considering selling your home, there's a tool there to get an instant online estimate of the home's value. And there's also an opportunity for you to sign up for me to do a full comparative market analysis, which is obviously going to be a lot more precise, particularly in a market like the one we're in now, where everything is changing so quickly. The automated systems are going to tend to be wrong. They're going to tend to overestimate what the value of your home is. Okay, with that in mind, let's go ahead and start talking about this week's topic. And it's a concerning one because it's oh so familiar. I've been doing this show since 2007, and so much of this sounds similar to what we experienced in the past. And what's really funny is no one is really seeing the connections. And in fact, they will list off all the reasons why 2023 is different from 2007 or 2008. But if you actually look at those reasons why it's different, those are actually reasons why it's the same. So let's go ahead and get into this and understand that while we are in a time where we are heading into what is more likely to be a difficult time than a less difficult time, things are bound to get worse from here, not better. We need to kind of understand the lay of the land, what's going on with lending, what's going on with buying. But let's sort of lay it out. Now, an article was put out by Risk Media. The Great Housing Market Correction of 2023 is what they titled this. And this is an article just hot off the presses for them. And just to sort of set the stage a little bit, most of the pundits out there that are the mainstream folks are saying to expect a 4, 5, 6% adjustment overall nationally. And my guess is that national number is going to be maybe a great national number, but we're going to see markets where it's a lot worse, and we're going to see markets where it's a lot better in terms of how much variation there is in changes in prices. But I think at the core of today's discussion are things very different from how they were the last time we had a major downturn? And I'm going to argue that there's far more in common this year in 2023 than there was in 2007 as far as what people want us to understand. So let's go ahead and just hit this right off the bat. For much of the past 2.5 years, it has been a housing market free-for-all with bidding wars, multiple offers over list price, and homes purchased sight unseen. But all of that is changing as the housing market is set to correct in 2023. Note that the forecast is for a housing market correction, not a housing market collapse. Housing market hyperbole should not mask favorable fundamentals that will support a resistant housing market. So, and it goes on to say, national data does not reflect the range of housing market conditions across the country. Home prices in the U.S. have risen by more than 40% over the past 3 years. And that first number, 40%, now that's a national trend, should throw you off right there, right? If you look back at what happened leading up to 2006, 7, and 8, the same kind of silly stuff was happening in terms of crazy increases in home value. So in terms of how the market has been acting for real estate, that's the very first thing we can say is the same, right? If we were to check out a chart of what home prices did leading up to the downturn in 2006, 7, and 8, it would look like the hockey stick that we've got going on right now. Except obviously this time around, we're dealing with much higher prices. Next, and I highlighted this for you, but it is important to note that 2023 is not 2008 when home prices fell by 30% or more in some places due to the perfect storm of loose credit standards, a surge in subprime lending, and an oversupply of homes and rising unemployment. Okay, well, let's just take those points and see if that is a valid statement. So the first one is loose credit standards. Now, last time we had this problem, it was simply ignoring credit ratings, right? It was no documentation. It was signature only. It was stated income. It was 0% down. It was 5% down. it was lending to people who were not qualified. Now, you could say lending standards aren't quite as loose now as they were, which I don't think is totally inaccurate, but they are still pretty loose. So let me read this to you. I was going to put this up on the screen so you could see what bank was doing this, but I decided that might not be fair because singling them out is unfair. I get these mails all the time, and this is one I happen to get today. And the title was "No Social Security Number, No Problem." So individual tax identification numbers are given to U.S. residents who do not have citizenship but live and work in the United States. Do you have an ITN? You may be eligible to purchase a home or refinance your property. So this is what this is. And remember, when you are pushing these kinds of marketing, you tend to be hitting a segment of the population that financially is in a less lucrative position to manage debt, a huge amount of debt. And obviously buying a home today represents a huge amount of debt. Loan benefits, and this is obviously aimed specifically at non-citizens, but I see these same things for all kinds of other stuff. There's tons of efforts going on out there to focus loans on underrepresented groups, and unfortunately, a whole lot of that also goes hand in hand with people who would suffer the most in a downturn, which is what happened last time. And you're doing no one a favor by letting them encumber themselves with a huge debt that they cannot manage if the market turns against them. So in this particular case, it was as low as 15% down payments available. And remember, we've covered on this podcast over the last year or two all kinds of loans that have as little as 1% down, or there were a couple that had 0% down, or that not only offered you 0% down, but then also gave you cash money for part of your down payment. Let's see, as low as 15% down payment available, full doc, 12 to 24 months bank statements, minimum 660 FICO, so a 660 credit score, which is very low, closings within 21 days or less. So this is what they're pushing. This is a product, one of many that I see all the time. So this idea that credit standards are not loose, they're not as loose, but arguing they are not loose, I don't think carries a whole lot of weight. I believe that we are doing some extremely loose lending. But let's now talk a little bit about subprime stuff. And I think these two things go hand in hand. While this time around, we are not simply ignoring credit ratings and just lending to whoever has a pulse, this time around, what we've done is screw around with what your credit rating actually equals. So today we say, oh yes, we're going to pay attention to your credit rating. We're very much going to make sure that if you are a credit risk and your score is below a certain level, we're not going to lend so that we can be secure that you are a good credit risk. Well, for those of you who may have seen commercials on your local TV or maybe seen ads online or read anything relating to this topic, you know that credit ratings have been artificially increased by a whole lot of things over the past few years. And I've talked about this on past podcasts. It's been a couple of years, I think, since we dealt with it. But there is a company out there advertising the ability to instantly get your credit score raised just by using your payment of rent as a positive element of your credit rating. And that's not really credit. If you stop paying your rent, you get kicked out. If you stop paying for your car, they take the car back. Now, granted, those are all things that may need to play some sort of a role in there. But the thing that's interesting is the things that no longer will negatively affect your credit rating. Medical debt no longer will affect your credit rating. So what we find is that, and remember the article that we talked about again on this podcast, I believe it was last year, the year before, where there was this news article about how people's credit ratings have magically increased since the year before. And what we need to understand is that things that shouldn't be part of your credit rating, like your phone, all these things that simply get turned off, when those aren't really credit, right? That's not you promising to pay back something and then paying it back. If we take a look at what has happened with credit ratings since 2011, this is the average credit score in the U.S. And look at the craziness. Now, we're going to point something out. Notice how it jumped from over 690, or jumped from 689 to over 690, and then from 2016 up, just started to make this dramatic increase. And there were changes done in 2014, 15, and 16 that really fed this artificial increase in credit scores. And so that's what we're dealing with. So instead of ignoring credit scores and making loans based on that, we are artificially inflating credit scores and making loans based on that. So we're doing the exact same thing we did last time. We're just attacking it from the other side of the coin. So instead of deluding ourselves on the ignoring credit scores side, we are deluding ourselves in believing that the credit scores that we have actually reflect good lending decisions. So notice this dramatic, because how do you explain this? Here's what I would love to find out. And you read through this and people just simply throw this data out there like, well, here's a wonderful thing. Here's credit scores increasing. People are changing their ways in terms of how they manage their money. But that's not the way this works. These things don't magically change themselves. If we had started a brand new policy of robust financial and personal economic education in high schools, or if we had decided that for folks in a difficult position in terms of their credit ratings or their current credit standing, they would take courses on how to manage their money and how to save money and all those sorts of things. If those things were happening, great. We could use this as some sort of a measurement. So if we're taking the temperature of what's happening with something and the temperature rises, you look for something to point at that has increased the temperature. But in this case, no one's applied more heat. No one's done anything. All they've done, instead of changing the heat, they've changed the tool that measures it so that tool is no longer accurate. Now, an article I was able to dig up. Now, this is from 2017. I just wanted to highlight this part. This is one, and I actually think this may be when I did that podcast about this topic. Those with lower scores may benefit from the removal of civil judgments, medical debt, and tax liens as factors. And all these other things that are now counted towards positive credit that never were and shouldn't, like phone bills and those types of things, just don't make sense. It's not a measure of credit worthiness because it's not a credit thing. It is I'm paying for a service, and when that service stops, or when I stop paying for the service will stop, right? If I stop paying for my phone will stop working. That's not a credit relationship. That's a fees for service relationship. So all these things should not be part of it. And I would argue that given the fact that things turned out the way they did in 2006, 7, and 8, with the credit ratings we had then, that if anything, it seems to me we should have been more stringent in making it more relevant when you achieve that higher credit score so that it can be relied upon, because that sure isn't what we're seeing. All right, so credit standards and a surge in subprime lending. Well, what I just discussed with you with the email that I got and all these other things that we're seeing and this practice is by definition subprime. There are still continuing to be pushes by government-sponsored entities, and these are the folks that got us in trouble last time. Remember, they're the ones that got into arrangements with various institutions, financial institutions, to securitize loans, particularly subprime loans, and have them get traded on the stock exchange, where lots of folks' retirements were invested in these things. In my opinion, subprime lending is not only alive and well, but it's flourishing at close to the level it was when we had our downturn last time. Next, oversupply of homes. Do these people not believe that today, and remember, this article came out today, January 23rd, are they making an argument that we don't have an oversupply of homes right now? Maybe we can argue that back in the day, anyone who wanted a house was buying a house, and now people aren't because interest rates are higher. But in terms of just straight up supply and demand, regardless of the reason why, we are gathering inventory. So if you look at what we've had here, in terms of inventory increase, just over the last, if we compare December to December, in Santa Clara County, inventory is up 82%. In San Jose, it's up 74%. In Morgan Hill, it's up 81%. In Gilroy, it's up 107% from the same time last year. That feels like a large supply of homes to me compared to past market, right? In terms of just tracking where inventory is going over time. Rising unemployment. Are we under the impression that unemployment isn't rising right now? At least here locally in Silicon Valley, how many different companies have talked about how many people they're laying off? Amazon, 18,000 people, I believe was the number. There are tons of companies in Silicon Valley laying people off. So where are the points on this list of reasons not to worry that actually make sense? Because I don't see it. I see more reasons to worry than to not worry. So where do we go with this? Well, first, and let's take a look at the final thing. So we're heading into a recession. Interest rates are high, but getting better than what they were at their worst. But the Fed has already said we need to get inflation down to 2%. We have a long way to go to get it down to 2%. So one of two things has to happen. Either we freeze interest rates where they are and hope that the downward trend continues towards 2%, which I don't believe it will, or we continue to raise interest rates until we get it down to 2%, let it stabilize, and by doing that, we will likely feed recession, right? Because you reduce interest rates to fight recession, but you increase interest rates to fight inflation. And we have these two things going on. We have recession continuing to sort of be ahead of us, not so much on the horizon, but a little closer than that. And the bottom line is we're going to feed the tendency towards recession by having higher interest rates. But if we decide that the important task here is to reduce inflation first, then we have to raise interest rates. But by doing that, you reduce capital investment. Companies start to tighten their belts and reduce expenses, and that's what we're seeing. And a lot of that is being reflected in the loss of jobs, particularly here in Silicon Valley. It may be different in your local market, but it sure is what I'm seeing here in terms of job freezes and in terms of headcount reductions and layoffs. It's all happening. I mean, Twitter obviously did its own thing, maybe for other reasons, but across the board, we're seeing reductions in jobs, not increases in jobs. So I'd love to get your feelings on this. As a buyer, seller, renter, whatever you might be here in Silicon Valley, do you feel confident that this is super different from 2006, 7, and 8? Do you believe that the points made here by Risk Media are accurate and that those are reasons we should not be worried? I not only don't believe that those are reasons we should not be worried, I believe when you actually educate yourself on what each one of those things is doing right now, those are all reasons you should be worried, not comforted. Okay, and I always hate having such a bad news downer of a show, but there is the stuff that's going on right now, the denial that's happening right now is a complete deja vu to 2005-6. And the folks who were right last time in terms of calling that downturn are calling another one this time. I think there's a very good chance that we're going to see a much more substantial decrease in property values above and beyond 5 and 6%. Will we see on average across the country the 30% drop that they mention here in this article? Maybe not. Maybe folks will have enough skin in the game in terms of how much they're leveraged when they buy a home, right? So in the example I gave, that 15% is required, but there are still an awful lot of loans out there where folks have very little invested in terms of equity into the home that they've purchased with an exorbitant mortgage. And remember what happened last time. First, homes got upside down. So now the home was worth less than what you could sell it for, right? Not only was it worth less than what you could sell it for, but you didn't have tens of thousands of dollars or you didn't have 20% invested in the property of the original purchase price. So in terms of skin in the game, you are now looking at a home that's across the street that has dropped in price to the point where if you simply bought that house, your payments would be lower, and it could be an identical house, but prices have dropped now enough that it compensates for what you've lost on the home that you're currently in. And we had this happen last time where folks would literally buy the home across the street and then abandon the first house and just let it get foreclosed on. I'm pretty sure that there are some defenses built in that that's not going to be a thing that happens now. But the key step there isn't necessarily buys the house across the street and abandons the one they're in. I think the key step there is abandons the house they're in. We've already seen trends also of softening rents. So as those things come into play and people see that they are spending a huge amount on their mortgage, and they are upside down in their mortgage, and they could not hope to sell it. They'd have to sell it at a loss. Where does that go? And it's not like we don't know where that goes. We lived through it last time. So feel free, however you're consuming this, whether it's on YouTube or whether it's the podcast or you're looking at it on my website, I would love for you to comment below or reach out to me directly from soldbyrobert.com. You can simply click Contact Robert and send me a message. I would love to find out what you think of this. Am I nuts? Should I buy myself a tinfoil hat? Am I far too pessimistic about where things are going? I did a survey recently of folks, I believe it was on Twitter, and most folks did not feel like the market was going to crash. They felt like it was going to stay relatively flat. They didn't feel like it was going to increase, but they felt like it was going to stay flat. And I think there's a very reasonable position to take that we're in much deeper trouble than that. All right, folks, the goal is always to leave you with more information on the table than I take up in your time. Absolutely hope we've achieved that today. Again, if you'd like to get in touch with me, check things out at soldbyrobert.com. Always trying to offer you the best possible tools for you to make the best, most educated decisions in real estate. Thanks again for listening, and I'll talk to y'all next time.